A lot of these autism trainings for police departments are aimed towards the younger ages. They're not really taking into account that these children are growing up to be adults.
Yes.
And so I think we lose sight of that a lot, especially like I work in an ABA clinic that's mostly with younger children, and coming from a residential background like what you're describing, that was really eye-opening to me to see just how much interaction they do have with law enforcement.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Science. Welcome back. I'm your host, Jerron Trotman, joined by my fantastic co-hosts, Joseph Adams and Darius Cooper. And today we have a powerhouse guest, Dr. Lyndsy Macri. Saying that right?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
She is a BCBA specializing in police training for autism awareness. Let's welcome her to the show, fellas.
Thank you.
Doctor.
I'm excited to be here.
Actually, let me say Lyndsy Coffield.
Lyndsy Coffield. That is my new married name. Yes,
newlywed coming back from the honeymoon.
Yep.
Go ahead and show the rock to the.
He did such a good job.
Ooh.
Yeah, not too bad, right?
Man, that's a rock.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is.
Fellas, take notes out there watching. Take notes. But yeah, no, thank you for joining us. I know we had met a while ago back at the GABA conference. Shout out to GABA.
Yeah.
And we started talking about, having this discussion.
Yeah.
And so I'm really excited to dive into this discussion with you today.
Yeah, absolutely.
So before we jump in, I want to give a quick stat. Did you guys that are listening, did you guys know that autistic individuals are 7 times more likely to have an interaction with law enforcement than neurotypical individuals? And yet some officers receive little to no formal training on autism. I find that fascinating.
Yes, it's a very important topic right now, especially. So,
What do you think when you hear that, Coop? What are you thinking about?
I mean, I just want to, excuse me, I lost my voice, man. This season took me out a little bit. We just came back from New York. That weather change was terrible.
Yeah, get you, bro.
I would say, this episode definitely resonates with me. I come from a law enforcement background. My pops was a correction officer for 20 years. Stepmom was a warden for 20 years. And I think that it's just something that's needed, and there's not enough platforms and conversations being had around this topic. Mm-hmm. I think that, there's already kind of a divide sometimes in our community in law enforcement. Mm-hmm. So to get past that and then step even deeper and talk about the neurodiverse community could be complex, but I think it needs to be had.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And I remember on an episode where we had Natasha Nelson on here, her and Joe, y'all were talking kind of extensively about the police training.
Yes.
So when you hear about this subject, kind of what are your thoughts on it?
So, I mean, in my practice, I serve older boys. So it really resonates with me. I've actually had a couple parents have to call the police a couple times because a kid eloped. I've got a kid that is 6'2", 275 pounds, and if he ever exhibited explosive maladaptive behavior. And then just from my background teaching in the EBD autism room, having an SRO come down, a few times and just seeing it live, it changes you because you're like, he's in handcuffs.
it gets ugly really fast.
I mean, from 0 to 10, and he's in handcuffs. So it's just, that was a moment for me where I just kind of.
Yeah. No, we're going to get into it. And that's exactly why today's conversation is so crucial. Before we dive too deep, I want to give Apollo Behavior a huge shout out. They're an organization all about supporting individuals with autism through high quality services and innovative approaches. So given today's topic on safety, community, and law enforcement training, their work aligns perfectly with what we're discussing today. So check them out at apollobehavior.com, and we'll tell you more about them later in the show. So, Lyndsy, you have a fascinating journey, but it didn't quite start in behavior analysis. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, so our listeners so they can kind of know more about you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I started in New Hampshire at the University of New Hampshire, and I found out recently that Jerome also went to the University of New Hampshire.
Wait. I thought he played basketball. I thought everybody knew him.
Wait, we went to UNH at a different time though, right?
No. I knew some of your friends.
Wow. Put me on blast in front of all my listeners. Wow.
I played softball there, so you should have known who I was too, right?
That's true.
All right, once a Wildcat, always a Wildcat.
Yeah, softball didn't really get invited to many parties, but it's all right. We had a good time. So
I love it.
Yeah, so I started at UNH and I was in speech pathology, and I had a decent GPA. I was a student athlete, and I had a really hard time getting into a master's program. I did not realize going into it how competitive the master's program in speech is, especially in New England. And at the time, I had no real desire to leave New England. My family's in New Hampshire. And so after college, I moved to Boston like many UNH students do. And I started as an RBT. And it's funny, I actually met my very best friend, my first day as an RBT. And she was my maid of honor in my wedding.
That's awesome.
So it's funny how that comes full circle. I like to tell the new trainees at Apollo, like, hey, look around the room right now, because the people that you're here with, it's very possible that you stay in touch with them and they're, going to help mentor you throughout your career. So that was special. But from there, our clinic down there had a connection with Simmons. And so I went over to Simmons University now and got my master's there. And that was before online learning. So this was 2012.
Great university, by the way. I love Simmons.
Great
things.
Simmons, I can't say enough about that program. I teach at West Florida now, and I love that program as well. But I can't say enough about me being there in person and getting that, in-person education and really having a lot of hands-on experience. Even my supervision hours were all in person. We don't even hear that anymore. So that was really, really special. From there, I really loved behavior analysis. I nerded out on it really hard. And I just really kind of stayed home a lot through COVID, and I decided to go in and get my PhD at that point. And when I started thinking about dissertation topics, one of my side hobbies is self-defense for women and firearms training. And I was in a course, and I overheard an officer kind of making a comment about how he felt that they didn't have time to really think about things like neurodiversity. And this was years ago, but it stuck with me. And it was just something I was really passionate about. And so I decided to kind of get more involved at that point in the law enforcement community.
So can you touch on that self-defense? You said,
Yeah.
What is that experience like? How can people sign up for it?
Yeah. Well, I initially, when I first moved down to Georgia, this is the first time I was away from my family. And I grew up with, a military brother, and I felt like I needed to educate myself. Just the current climate of the world scared me. And I'm a big runner. I love running in the woods. But, as a female with my headphones on, it's very easy to, lose track of your surroundings. And I just felt like I needed to educate myself more on not just firearms, but even like jujitsu and other ways of keeping myself safe as a single female at the time. And as I got more into that, I started meeting women who were going through or coming out of abusive relationships. And what they were saying was, hey, I got out of this relationship, but I can't sleep at night because I sleep alone and I'm scared. And so giving them, just some education around, what would you do if you came across a firearm? How do you know that it's not loaded? And from there, I started taking classes to become a range safety officer. And thankfully we have some ranges in the area that I can train at. But it's just been eye-opening, and actually it kind of helped bridge that gap between what I do as a behavior analyst and then entering the law enforcement field a little bit more as well.
So, first of all, this is a fascinating topic. I know our listeners who are listening right now are probably glued to the screen already, because this is not something we talk about in our community a lot.
Yeah.
But what was the moment you realized training in autism, police training in autism, was something that was necessary, or that you could potentially have some passion and motivation to kind of dive deeper into?
I think getting into that firearms realm, I was just naturally then exposed to more people in the law enforcement industry. And the more that I spoke to them, the more they would actually just ask me like, hey, do you mind coming and training us? We trust your judgment on this. Would you be willing to come? And what I was hearing from a lot of the officers was they were getting a lot of parents that were asking to come and train, and the parents were coming from a very emotional state when they were talking about keeping their child safe. And so what some of the police officers that I spoke with felt were missing was more direction. Like they actually wanted to be told, like, yes, of course we don't want to harm your child, but what do we do? Like, what are some proactive strategies we can take? And the other thing that was coming up a lot is, a lot of these autism trainings for police departments are aimed towards the younger ages. So you'll see police departments always in Autism Awareness Month, they're coloring their cars with puzzle pieces and they're doing all this stuff and they're investing hundreds of thousands of dollars in these sensory kits. But they're not really taking into account, like what you said earlier, that these children are growing up to be adults.
Yes, they are.
Yes.
And so I think we lose sight of that a lot, especially like I work in an ABA clinic that's mostly with younger children. And coming from a residential background, like what you're describing, that was really eye-opening to me to see just how much interaction they do have with law enforcement. So
what's a moment where the police officers were like, all right, Lyndsy's cool. Like we trust her a little bit. Like any cool type of things you had to go through, anything that was a little different besides just the obvious stuff. But like, is there that one moment they're like, yeah, she can come in the back of the squad car. She's pretty cool.
Well, never in the back.
You're right. Never in the back.
And that's actually like a fun fact I didn't know about the back of police cars is they're really filthy. There's like, people act out back there a lot with bodily fluids and things. So they actually wouldn't let me sit in the back. They're like, we don't do that to people we like. Like you sit in the front.
Uncomfortable back there too, right?
Yeah. Like the seats are waterproof, So like if anything were to have it, it's just a little...
I didn't know that.
I'm a germaphobe, so I was like, all right, I'll sit up front. But yeah, there was one moment I was on a ride along and it was a well-being check. And I've seen, family members who have passed, like I've gone and viewed their bodies and things, but I've never just been sitting listening to like Lil Wayne one moment and then walking into a house to like find a dead body the next moment. And so just how quickly like us going to goofing around, listening to music to like, holy cow, like this just really got serious. And we were going up to like a 3rd floor apartment. So the landlord, she was a very, very heavy set woman. And she had said, this keeps happening. Like, I don't know why this keeps happening to my apartments. And I think she was referring to overdoses. But every turn we took going up that stairs, she just kept saying, getting closer to me and closer to me. And it made me really uncomfortable. And then all of a sudden I was thinking, is this like an ambush? Like, are they trapping us up in like this corner? Which I hadn't even thought about. All I was thinking about was just the emotional piece of seeing like a deceased person. And so I think like that moment, and I did say to the woman, like, ma'am, like, I need you to back up and give me some space. Cause she was just right. I think she was scared too. But she was right on top of me. And I think like that moment was a defining moment of like, okay, Lyndsy's cool. She can come with us. Like, cause I kind of just tried to take the emotion out of it as much as I could and just stay as calm as I possibly could. We got up there and it turns out no one was in the apartment.
Okay.
So all that fear and stuff kind of was unnecessary, but it just shows you how quickly like an officer has to turn off one part of their brain to jump to the next. And it was just and this is a female officer too. And she said to me, she's like, backup's on their way. So like, we won't be in there for too long by ourselves. But that was definitely a moment where I was like, wow, this is not what I thought policing is, and that's nothing.
I mean, just with that, I just want to take a moment, and I think we all should take a moment to give a shout out to the police officers. Yeah. Everybody who's serving us. It's a hard job, you know. It's a lot of back and forth. Joe was speaking before we had here. There's a lot of controversy sometimes, but it really is a tough job. And you talk about the ability to just compartmentalize like that. I mean, it's quickly. I mean, that hit me just now, and I'm sure you have more stories like that. So I appreciate you sharing.
You know, I think there's a lot of are there bad eggs in policing? Yes. Is there bad training in policing? Yes. But there's also bad ABA too, right? And we work really hard to protect that and making sure that, you know, our ABA is excellent and that it's compassionate and assent-based. And I see similarities sometimes in that, in what we're describing. Like there's bad ABA out there.
Yes.
And if that's shocking to anybody listening, I highly recommend that you get on some Facebook community groups and see what's being said about our science, because that's really scary. I mean, this is our livelihood and we have to protect that. And I think a lot of the good police departments feel the same way.
Yeah.
So let me ask, what does bad ABA look like to you?
Well, I think, you know, I see in my experience, some of the stuff that I've seen, and not at Apollo necessarily, but just in, you know, as you're looking through some of these groups, is forcing physical contact, sometimes communicating for the child. You know, like one of the biggest cringy ABA things I see is when we're running PECs or a manding program, and it's so obvious to me that this client wants nothing to do with this item, and yet we're full physicaling them to hand over the item. And so things like that. I also, you know, remind our staff often, like, hey, when a child flops to the floor, like our first response should not be to prompt them to stand back up. Like, what are they looking for on the floor?
Talk about it, Lyndsy.
And things like that, right? And I think that older ABA, we've come a long way, right? And I think that it's just disheartening to hear in these parent groups, you know, parents talking about how they would never put their child in ABA because of the trauma it could cause. And I'm like, dang, like we've got to do better there. So
I know my BCBAs and practitioners are going to love this. So for BCBAs who are listening and thinking, I love to get involved with this kind of work that Lyndsy's doing, where should they start? What should they do? Is there any websites they can go to? Should they go to there? Like, what should they do? Yeah,
I get this question a lot at conferences if I present on something where people will come up after and say, oh, you know, my dad's a police officer. I'd be really great at this. How do I get involved? And one of the first things that I always tell BCBAs to do is really to start immersing themselves as much as they can into police culture. You have to be familiar with the lingo. It's helpful when you go into, you know, a training with a department and you're actually familiar with their stats. How many people are living in that town? What are their most common interactions with autism? What questions do they have, right? So I spent a lot of time listening to police podcasts. I read this one book I highly recommend, like everybody read, even if you're not into police training. It's called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss.
Okay.
And he is an FBI negotiator. But it's really just about how to talk to people and his de-escalation strategies. You know, I was thinking like I could build some of these into my behavior plans, like, you know, and he gave some really great tips on that. But, you know, starting to think about going into the police mindset. I also would recommend a lot of departments have citizens police academies. And I went through one a couple of years ago when I first moved to Georgia. And what they do is, you know, it's once a week. You go to the department and every week they talk about a different topic. So 1 week it's canines, right? 1 week it's how do you analyze blood splatter?
Interesting.
1 week it's, you know, how does our traffic system work? 1 week it's a 911 sit-in. And so you're just kind of learning about your community and building relationships with the officers there. Another thing to consider is departments are more likely to hire you if your course is post-credentialed. So that's kind of their version of a CEU.
Okay.
So they're not going to, many departments will do it out of the goodness of their heart. But most departments would love to get training hours for it. And you can't get training hours if you don't have your course approved by Post. Georgia Post was fantastic. They approved mine quickly with no issues. So Georgia Post is definitely the way to go on that. And then consider trading training for training. So I spent a lot of time saying, hey guys, I'll come and train your department if I can sit in on your standardized sobriety testing. Because I was hearing from police officers that, how do I tell the difference between someone who's under the influence and someone who's stimming? And so I said, well, I want to go in and see what they're training you on. And so at the beginning of doing this, I traded a lot of training for ride-alongs and training for more training just so I could educate myself more. But those are kind of some of the things I would start with if I were considering this. So I wouldn't say just go in.
No, I love this.
You got to do some work. Yeah.
This is fascinating. I'm hoping that the BCBAs are listening to this, the organizations are listening to this, the police officers and law enforcement listen to this, because you're dropping some dimes here of conversations we typically don't have in our field. We just don't. So no, this is great. This is great. What's one thing that you wish you knew before you started working kind of in this space?
I think it kind of goes back to, I wish I had put myself in their shoes a little bit quicker. When I was giving instructions to officers about how to approach a scene, I wasn't always thinking about officer safety first. And I think that the more that you, kind of think from the officer's perspective, the more you're going to not lose your audience there. The example I was just saying with that story of, the walking up the stairs to a well-being check, right? Like that's something I didn't learn until like 3 years in. And I wish I, had thought about that before. So
I want to shift to a new segment that we have. Look at Joe over there. Coop inspired this right here. He's like, yo, we got Coops off the clock. We got to get a segment going with Joe here. Yeah. So I want to introduce Straight Talk with Joe.
All right, parents. So this one's for you. And Lyndsy, I'm going to lean on you a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
A lot of you have some concerns about interactions with law enforcement, and we're going to kind of break it down a little bit. So, Lyndsy, I was walking into an elementary school, and I saw a piece of paper in the county that I serve, which is Newton County. They had a scent kit. So, Lyndsy, can you explain exactly what a scent kit is?
Yes.
And how that can help a young man or a young kiddo that potentially elopes?
Yeah, absolutely. So I learned recently that the top 3 contacts that police have with individuals with autism are suspicious persons, crises or medical emergencies, but the biggest one is missing persons, right? And so, either children or adults who are eloping from their home. And there's only so much you can do when the child has already left, right? You can give pictures. You can, maybe think about some of their favorite places or check with neighbors. But one tool that I feel like isn't talked about enough is the canine scent kit. And I know when we think of canines, we think of like a bite dog.
Yes, big bad dog.
A big, like German Shepherd or, a Doberman or something. But a lot of the police departments now are moving to more community-based canines. And one of the types is for human scent. And so these scent kits, they're about $25 online. But what you do is you take a piece of the individual's clothing and you rub it around the inside of this little container. And it's good in your fridge for upwards of, and don't quote me on this, but I think it's a couple of years. And so let's say somebody, elopes for the home or even an elderly person with dementia, you can give that kit to the canine officer and it gives that scent to the dog to be able to track down the person. So
nice.
That's pretty new.
Is
it new or is it just, it's kind of been there? Because the first time I heard about it, I was like, man, this is pretty cool.
Yeah, I can't say it's new, but I think it's one of those things we don't really talk about.
Correct.
So. Because everybody leans on AirPods.
Yeah.
And, I think about this a lot, not to go too off topic, but in my clinic, we're teaching kids, how do we tell somebody who we are? Or how do we tell them who our parents are, our phone numbers? Yes. And often we're doing this on an AAC device, right? And one thing I always ask the BCBAs at Apollo is, how often is that child, when they go to leave the room, are they grabbing that device with them? Because what I'm picturing is at home, right? If they're not using their device at home, us teaching them their personal contact information on the device, they're leaving without that thing, right?
Yes.
So why are we spending so much time on that, right? And so maybe we need to move to a medical ID bracelet that's permanently, you know, on the child, or maybe we need to move to something that is more, even an air tag in a shoe is not going to help you if the child runs off without shoes. So just thinking about that. So
that's really innovative. It's really innovative there. You're dropping some ideas. No, especially in 2025, I feel like we should have some better means, right? Especially for that, tracking all those good things. So for all the people that are listening that own their own clinics and stuff like that, like you're also giving them some advice as well. I see you got your Apollo cup. You got your Apollo hoodie on.
This was my 3-year anniversary gift from Apollo.
Who's the owner of Apollo?
Stanley.
Who's
Kim Dean.
Kim Dean. Okay.
Kim Dean. He's the man. He convinced me to move down here from Boston.
Right.
So. And now I'm stuck here because I met my husband here.
Shout out to Kim. Now, I know when we were talking before we had this episode, you've done some good work at Apollo. You're spearheading some great initiatives there. Can you talk a little bit about that? I know you kind of talked about the annual police visits and kind of other stuff that you were doing. Can you speak to our listeners about that?
Yeah. So I'm really impressed with the work that we've done at Apollo. We've recently gotten our turnover rate down to under 30% annually, which is like unheard of.
Oh, well, hold on. Back up. Say that one more time for our listeners, because that's actually an amazing stat.
Our RBT turnover rate annualized is now below 30%.
Wow.
And that was a huge initiative by our executive team over the last year. It was really to focus on that. But I just think one thing that I really appreciate about Apollo is police training doesn't directly impact Apollo, right? In the sense of it's not something that like this is my passion project. Mm-hmm. And yet when I go to Kim or my supervisor, Kristen Vaughn, and I say, hey, I really want to do this podcast because policing is important to me, they say, go for it. Like in that, you've got to find a place like that to work, because if you submit your entire well-being to your clients and you are focused on your clients in the clinic, out of the clinic, you're reading research that's going to help your clients on the weekends, like that's all great, but you are going to burn yourself out really quickly. You have to have that outlet in ABA just to kind of protect like your work-life balance, right? And so I appreciate that. But the other thing that they've allowed me to do is start to have more community days with our local police department. Mm-hmm. And so we will have, we're in Forsyth County and our Johns Creek clinic. And we will have once a year Forsyth County, shout out to them because they actually look forward to this event now. They'll come down, they'll bring us, some swag for the kids. They'll bring one of the community canines that the kids can play with. And at first I was doing it for the clients, to expose the clients to, the lights, the sirens, the sensory overload of those types of things. But at the end of the day, what I was finding is that the police officers were getting a lot out of it as well. Mm-hmm. And here they are being exposed to 30 different individuals on the spectrum, all different behaviors, all different communication modalities, all different strengths, right? And for them to see that autism is not just a 3-year-old with an AAC device was really valuable. Mm-hmm. And I think it was also helpful for the RBTs to see that interaction as well. Mm-hmm. When I first started my dissertation with body camera, I had some of the RBTs watch the body cam. Mm-hmm. And it was a 2-hour segment of about 10 different 10 different scenarios. When they walked in the room, they were angry already. Mm-hmm. They were like, these are going to be nasty videos. Like, these police are wrong. These police need more training. Yeah. But I purposely put in 5 good and 5 bad. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And by the end of it, I had some of them saying, I could never be a police officer. Yeah. Like,
So let me ask, why do you think that is? Like, why do you think that's most people's initial thought? Mm-hmm. And stuff like that.
Yeah. And again, I think it kind of goes back to why are some people's initial thought about ABA is that it's bad, right? And because I think there is some bad policing out there. I think there is a need for training.
Yes.
I also think the media plays a huge component into that, right? And, we are in the media now more than ever. I also think the media plays a huge component as to bad ABA as well, right? Where, I have parents sometimes come in for an intake meeting and they've been Googling autism and they are horrified that their 2-year-old was just diagnosed and they're thinking it's a life sentence. And I'm trying to get them to understand what you're seeing on YouTube is a 14 or 15-year-old who never received services, right? And so it's a lot of these misconceptions. But yeah, that's not to say that there isn't some correlation between what they're seeing on the media is actually happening, right? And that training does need to happen.
So let me ask, from all the police trainings that you've done and working in the ABA space, what things do you think could possibly work in the ABA space, and what ABA things do you think could work in the police space?
Yeah. That's funny. I actually thought about that last night. So the more trainings I go to, the more I realize that policing is very similar in a lot of senses or not policing so much, but the science behind human behavior that they see when they're interacting with the community is sometimes very similar to our science. For example, I went to a felony traffic stop class. That was one of my trade for trades.
Okay.
And they were like, what does this have to do with autism? And I'm like, it doesn't, but I just want to know, what are your typical steps during a traffic stop? Because a lot of individuals with autism drive as they should, right? And think about when you're driving. If I get pulled over as a neurotypical, for lack of a better word, individual, I'm still stressed. I'm scared and I'm stressed. Even if I don't think I did anything wrong, it's still an escalated, heightened situation, right? So now add on top of that, a neurodiverse person or someone who needs more time coping with those things and how they might interact, right? Yeah. So one thing that I learned in the felony traffic stop is how important imitation can be as a de-escalation tool. So if I come in hot, that person's going to match me, right? And I tell this to parents often too. When the police arrive on scene, they are going to come in hot, and it is not going to be pretty all the time. They are coming in to secure the scene. They want to make sure that there isn't someone hiding. They want to make sure that their safety is okay, right? And when they come in, whether the child has autism or not, they're scanning and looking for safety threats, right? And so I always tell parents, this is going to be the hardest thing you ever do, but you are going to have to do your very best to stay calm, even if they start putting your child in handcuffs. Because your child is going to match what you are doing, or is likely matching what you are doing. And part of that is because a lot of individuals with autism receive ABA, and they're receiving imitation goals. We're teaching them to scan their environment and do what everybody else is doing to be successful in schools and things like that, right? And so I'm not saying that's always going to work. And I'm not saying that if someone came in and put my stepdaughter in handcuffs, that I would be calm either.
Right. No, so
I am not calm when it comes to her.
I really appreciate this conversation because even with what you're saying now, in this moment, police officers are coming to secure, like you said, they're coming to secure, and you're asking parents, not you specifically, but in those moments, we're asking them to stay calm, even with their kids potentially being put in handcuffs, even with the energy of the police officer maybe being kind of hard and heavy. Not saying that's necessarily a good or a bad thing, but I'm going to put you on the spot here.
Yes.
If you could redesign in some way or form the way police officers are maybe trained with no limits, we're just talking about a world, what's a creative idea in terms of modification of their training to maybe better fit that situation would you recommend?
There's a lot that could be done. I've heard a lot of departments toying with the idea of a social worker coming with the police officer. And I have some interesting thoughts on that. I think there's definitely a benefit to it. I think it's more beneficial after the fact, right? So in the moment, I will tell you things can escalate very quickly. And there are certainly times where I've been on a ride along that I wish I was not there.
Wow.
Because what I'm doing is I'm taking away from that officer's concentration. He's trying to keep me safe. She's trying to keep me safe. And it's just one other thing for them to think about.
Yeah. I think that if mental health and those kind of situations were taken more serious during police training, it wouldn't be such a distraction. Because I could see that perspective, but I also feel like because it's not as real of a thing as it should be. Like as far as a social worker or a mental health or a therapist actually being there to support the police officer, I feel like it's more of an idea than actually being something that's put into training and the neurodiverse and police department actually working together in some aspects.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I often hear like autism training compared to like CPR training, where it's like, okay, I got to check this off.
Yeah.
And
Right.
part of the reason that I got involved in this space is because I wanted to catch officers' attention when I'm in that training. I wanted to make sure that they weren't just zoning out and that they actually did get something out of it.
Yes.
And it's very hard to do that if you don't first immerse yourself in their culture, do some ride-alongs, take a page out of their book in a sense, and really get to know your audience. So what I started to do more of was incorporate body cam into my training. So rather than me just showing them a textbook, I'm like, hey, look at this body cam of this officer. And unfortunately, I kind of had to tie it into look at the liability that you, not only should you care for this person, but you're going to end up all blasted in this day and age with media. You're going to end up blasted everywhere as that person who harmed an innocent person. And you don't want to be that person either. And so you have to find the MO. Like, what is the MO here? What is the motivation to learn this stuff? And if it's not staying out of court, if it's not losing your job, it should at the very least just be being compassionate and caring for your community that you have sworn yourself to serve. And so I don't know if that's answering your question at all.
Yeah,
but
definitely. Definitely.
So I want to add, or I want to touch on something because, you know, being a teacher in certain environments, like we kind of have some of those same experiences. And I don't know if some of this stuff is generalized into SRO officers who are in schools, and you've got the autism level 1, level 2, you've got the MID class, and you've got these kids that may get in trouble, you know, fights may happen, and they're coming down to the room, of course, trying to secure the situation. But, you know, we're seeing a lot of incidents in school systems to where kids are hitting teachers, and these kids are going to, you know, like to jail. So is there anything that's going on there? Kind of like they're going out and reaching out maybe in the day programs, the adult cares places to kind of teach and train some of those staff?
Yeah, I think the more that we can get autistic individuals in front of first responders outside of a crisis situation, the better. Because I think what's happening is a crisis happens and we're like, dang, like we should have trained for this. And we've got to get ourselves to a point where we are proactively saying like, hey, I would love for you to come to my classroom of high school, you know, autistic students so that when they start driving, like, let's practice a pullover. Like, let's practice a traffic stop.
Let's model all of that stuff.
All those things, right?
Yes.
And
Proactively.
just trying our best to at least like encourage those connections before the incident happens. But yeah, I mean, in SRO, their whole purpose is really to get to know the children at the school. And so that's discouraging to hear because it really should be a matter of providing that training and like handcuffs in school and arrests in school are that's different than what I'm familiar with coming from community versus school. But
this is an amazing discussion, guys. It's a much needed discussion that we're having here. I'm taking it in. I'm you know, it's a lot. And it's heavy too. You know, I know there's probably a lot of parents and caregivers who are watching right now who have had some experiences, and I encourage the caregivers out there listening, you know, comment on what you would want police officers to maybe do differently or your perspective on things. So we want to invite our listeners in our community to jump in this conversation. Lyndsy, me and you have some similarities. We talked about UNH. We are also on the GABA board together
We
now.
are.
Georgia,
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you. We have some big things in store.
Yeah, that's a big thing.
Let's clap it up for GABA right now. I'm really looking forward to collaborating with you more.
Yeah.
And you're sharing so much with our listeners right now, and we really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Really appreciate that. I want to transition here to probably my favorite segment of every podcast episode. Right. And our listeners know what that is. It's Coops Off the Clock.
Dr. Lyndsy. You know what I'm saying? That's how we gonna start. Right. We touched on a little bit, married, right? Big ass rock. And we don't even curse, but that's a big ass rock. You know what I'm saying? So look, we work very hard, right? I want you to tell us and the listeners this summer, phone off, laptop off, what's the vacation for you and your husband?
Ooh. I like that.
Well, my parents are actually starting to retire up in Moosehead Lake in Maine.
Okay.
And that's up on the Canadian border. It is so remote. It's a miserable drive to get there, but once you're there, it is awesome. It's quiet. I mean, picture, like you guys know, Lanier and Allatoona, how packed those get in the summer.
Yeah.
Imagine a lake that size with 2 other boats on it.
That's wild.
In the middle of July. And so I have a stepdaughter now, which my parents are super excited about because this is their first grandchild. And so they've never visited me more. I'm like, if I had known that all I had to do was have a stepchild, I would have done that sooner. But yeah, we'll go up there and just kind of unwind. It's nice. There's no service. So we can really, it's not during college football season. So my husband's actually...
Wait. Since you mentioned college football, I didn't think you were going to get here. But what college football team does your husband like?
He is a huge Georgia Bulldogs fan.
Go Bulldogs.
Huge Bulldogs fan. I mean...
Didn't we go to the SEC championship? We did go to the
Yeah, I heard him perk up last night when we were meeting, and I heard him look through the thing they say Georgia. And my mom is so funny because she has never been into football, and all of a sudden she's staying up past midnight watching these triple overtime games and all this stuff, and she's like. And then my stepdaughter's like, Dad, what time are the Bulldogs playing today? And she's 6. And I'm like, this is different in the South.
Yeah, it's different.
It's very different.
I'm like, we used to go to Boston college games for maybe $10 a ticket. And that would be the highlight of our fall, It
is a religion.
It's so different here.
Yes.
And it's really cute to watch a 6-year-old know that much about football.
I love, we started from young here. And, you coming from New England. I lived in New England for a very long time. Some of my best friends are still in New England, but it's just not a thing up there. So you come in here and realizing that, and to all our listeners, we always kind of have some good banter going on here, but it really is a thing.
It's a thing.
And it's friendly competition.
Yeah,
at the end of the day.
course.
Joe was a big Georgia guy over there. So, and we kind of put Coop on. Coop really didn't know much about college football.
That's not a thing in New York.
It's not a thing in New York.
Yeah, see, exactly.
Nah. But it definitely is.
Are you Giants or Jets or Bills or?
Bills.
Okay, so you had a rough Sunday.
Yeah, he's really a bandwagon. Whoever's winning,
Colorado,
Colorado. He ain't been a Colorado fan the entire time. You really a bandwagon,
I went to
right?
Colorado University.
University of Colorado, I thought.
For a visit. It doesn't matter though. You know what I'm saying? Shout out to Dion. You know
Shout
what
out
I'm
to
saying?
Dion. You listen to this?
Yes.
She's a bandwagon, right?
To Dion, Shador. You know what I'm saying? Shout out to Shador. You feel me? That's all I gotta say.
Oh my God, I love that. Man, before we sign off.
Right, I won't bring up college football.
Before we sign off here, I want to give one quick shout out again to Apollo Behavior for being part of this episode, for allowing you to be here on a work day. We are here. This is during the day, and we're really learning some great things. So if you want to learn more about Apollo Behavior, please visit apollobehavior.com. Please check them out, all the amazing things they're doing. Lyndsy, this has been an amazing conversation. Really appreciate you sharing that knowledge with us. For our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, subscribe, leave a review, follow us on our social media handles. We're on everything. We're on LinkedIn now. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook,
including
now. TikTok. Our TikTok followers, we love you. Y'all keeping us alive out here. Thank you, TikTok. They try to They tried to get rid of TikTok, guys. They tried to get rid of it, but we still live and we still here.
Yeah.
So appreciate everybody. Appreciate this conversation. Appreciate all the work that you're doing. And we'll definitely catch you guys on the next episode of Beyond the Science. Until then, continue to stay curious, guys. Continue to make an impact. And thank you for joining us today. Lyndsy, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Thanks.